At 32 years old, he ruled the largest empire on earth. Millions feared his name. Entire kingdoms collapsed the moment his army appeared on the horizon. And yet, the man who conquered almost the entire known world died suddenly, mysteriously, alone in a palace far from home. No one truly knows how Alexander the Great died. Some say poison, others say disease. But one thing is certain. The moment he died, the world descended into chaos. Because Alexander was not just a king, he was a force of nature. A man so obsessed with glory that he pushed human ambition beyond every limit imaginable. And the terrifying part is that the more power he gained, the more dangerous he became. So stay until the end, because the real story of Alexander the Great is far more brutal, emotional, and unbelievable than any legend ever told. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Macedonia, a kingdom many Greeks considered uncivilized and barbaric, but from the beginning there was something unusual about him, something intense. His mother, Olympias, filled his mind with stories that he was no ordinary child. Some legends claimed she believed Zeus himself was Alexander's true father, and when a child grows up believing he may be descended from a god, limits begin to disappear. His father, King Philip II, was one of the most brilliant and ruthless military leaders of the ancient world. Philip transformed Macedonia into a terrifying military power. But he did not raise Alexander with softness or affection. He raised him for war. From childhood, Alexander learned one brutal lesson: the world belongs to the strong. Then came the moment that would become legendary. A massive black horse named Bucephalus had become impossible to control. Experienced warriors failed to tame it. The animal attacked anyone who approached. But young Alexander noticed something nobody else understood. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. So Alexander turned the horse toward the sun and mounted it. The crowd watched in shock as the animal suddenly calmed beneath him. His father stared at him and said words that would echo through history. "My son, seek a kingdom worthy of you. Macedonia is too small." That sentence changed Alexander forever. From that moment on, he no longer wanted to simply rule. He wanted to conquer everything. But another man shaped his mind in an even more dangerous way: Aristotle. Yes, one of the greatest philosophers in history became Alexander's teacher. While Philip taught him war, Aristotle taught him philosophy, science, literature, politics, and the stories of ancient heroes. And Alexander became obsessed with one hero above all others: Achilles, the legendary warrior of the Iliad. Alexander carried a copy of Homer's writings with him everywhere he went. He didn't just admire Achilles. He wanted to become greater than him. That obsession would eventually consume his entire life. Then everything changed overnight. During a public celebration, King Philip II was assassinated. Chaos exploded instantly: screams, blood, panic. And suddenly, at only 20 years old, Alexander became king. But many believed he was too young to survive. Enemies rose immediately. Greek cities rebelled. Rival kingdoms prepared for war. Everyone expected Alexander to fail. Instead, he responded with terrifying violence. He crushed rebellions mercilessly. One city in particular, Thebes, became an example to the entire world. After the rebellion, Alexander destroyed almost the entire city and sold thousands into slavery. The message was clear: defy me, and you disappear. The world listened. Greece bowed before him. But Alexander was only getting started, because one obsession had haunted him since childhood: the Persian Empire. At that time, Persia controlled the largest empire on earth, richer, larger, more powerful than anything Macedonia had ever faced. Most believed invading Persia was suicide. Alexander disagreed. In 334 BC, he crossed into Asia with around 40,000 soldiers and began one of the greatest military campaigns in human history. And from the very beginning, Alexander fought differently from every other king. He did not hide behind his army. He led from the front. He charged directly into battle beside his men, risking death constantly. That made his soldiers worship him, but it also made him terrifying. Because Alexander seemed almost incapable of fear. Then came his first direct confrontation with the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus. The Persian army was enormous. Some ancient accounts exaggerated the numbers into the hundreds of thousands. Alexander's army was vastly outnumbered. But then Alexander did something almost insane. Instead of attacking the Persian army itself, he charged directly toward Darius. The battlefield exploded into chaos. And when Darius saw Alexander cutting through the battlefield toward him like a living weapon, the Persian king panicked and fled. The moment Darius ran, the Persian army collapsed. Alexander had defeated the most powerful ruler on earth, and instead of being satisfied, he became even more obsessed. City after city surrendered before him. Syria, Phoenicia, Egypt. Every victory made his legend grow larger. In Egypt, something extraordinary happened. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator and declared him a godlike ruler. Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, which would become one of the greatest cities in history. And somewhere along the way, Alexander himself began believing he was truly divine. That may have been the moment his ambition became unstoppable. Then came the battle that would decide the fate of the ancient world. Gaugamela, the final confrontation between Alexander and Darius. Once again, the Persians had overwhelming numbers. More soldiers, more cavalry, more weapons. But Alexander possessed something far more dangerous. Military genius. The battle became a catastrophe for Persia. Alexander shattered the Persian Empire completely. Darius fled once more. Not long afterward, he was betrayed and murdered by his own men. And just like that, Alexander inherited the greatest empire on earth. Think about this for a second. At only 25 years old, Alexander controlled territory stretching from Greece to Egypt to deep into Asia. Most men would have stopped there. Alexander could not stop, because conquest had become an addiction. The further he advanced, the more invincible he felt. He crossed deadly deserts, frozen mountains, unknown lands no Greek had ever seen before. And eventually, he reached India. There, for the first time in his life, Alexander encountered something completely unfamiliar. War elephants, massive armored beasts crashing into battle. His soldiers were horrified. The battles in India became savage and exhausting. Alexander himself nearly died several times. During one siege, an arrow pierced through his lung. His army believed he was dead. But somehow, he survived. And every time he survived impossible odds, his legend grew even larger. But finally, something inside his empire began breaking. His own soldiers. They had marched for years, fought endless battles, watched friends die thousands of miles from home. And when Alexander demanded they continue deeper into India, they refused. For the first time in his life, Alexander heard the word no. That moment shattered something inside him. The man who believed he was chosen by the gods was now being denied by his own army. Reluctantly, he turned back. But the return journey changed him. Alexander became increasingly unstable. He grew paranoid, suspicious, violent. Old friends were executed. Trusted generals feared him. The more power he gained, the more isolated he became. Then came the greatest mystery of all. In 323 BC, while in Babylon, Alexander suddenly became sick. High fever, extreme weakness, terrible pain. Day after day his condition worsened. And then, the conqueror of the world died, at only 32 years old. To this day nobody knows exactly what killed him. Some believe he was poisoned. Others believe disease destroyed his body after years of wounds, exhaustion, alcohol, and endless warfare. But perhaps the most tragic part came afterward. When Alexander was asked who should inherit his empire, legend says he whispered, "To the strongest." And with those words, chaos consumed everything. His generals immediately began fighting each other for control. Wars exploded across the empire. The kingdom Alexander spent his entire life building started collapsing almost instantly. It was as if the empire had existed only through the force of his personality. But even death could not destroy his legend. Alexander became immortal in history. Julius Caesar admired him. Napoleon admired him. Conquerors across centuries dreamed of becoming the next Alexander the Great. Even today, more than 2,000 years later, his name still represents ambition, conquest, and power beyond imagination. But maybe the most fascinating part of his story is this. Alexander spent his entire life trying to conquer the world, only to discover that no man can conquer mortality itself. Perhaps that is why his story still feels so powerful today, because behind the unstoppable warrior was a human being terrified of being forgotten. And ironically, thousands of years later, the world still remembers him. Now tell me something. Do you think Alexander truly believed he was a god, or did unlimited power slowly destroy his mind? Comment below because I really want to hear your opinion. And if you enjoy true stories more intense than movies, leave a like and subscribe to the channel because the next videos will reveal historical secrets that changed humanity forever.